Okay, everyone, welcome. We gave it a few minutes to allow everyone to try to join in, as we have several hundred people who have registered for today's event. I'd like to welcome everyone to today's presentation, Mobile Elevating Work Platform User Responsibilities. This is the first of a series of webinars that the IPAF North American Regional Council are developing to assist MEWP users, typically the employers of MEWP operators, to understand the responsibilities, to be able to plan appropriately, and to ensure that all of their jobs are safe and effective when MEWP operations are going to occur. Today's presentation is going to be recorded. For those of you who have not been on one of these devices before, if you go down to the bottom of your screen, typically there's a button down there or up on the top. You can see a Q&A where you have questions during this session. Please enter your questions into that box, and we'll have a time at the end of the session to try to answer a few of these questions. Any questions that we don't have the opportunity to answer during this presentation, we will address in written format following the presentation itself. Today's presentation will be delivered by myself. I'm Tony Groat. I'm the IPAF North America Manager. I am also the chairman of the ANSI SAIA A92.22 Safe Use Standard and the Canadian B354.7 Safe Use Standard. My colleague today in our presentations is Bal Guerrero from United Rentals. Bal is the director of the United Academy, and he is also chairman of the IPAF North American Council.
Good morning, everybody.
Okay, here we go. So, what's the purpose or goal of today's webinar for all of you who are joining us? And the goal is pretty simple. It's to raise awareness and understanding of the responsibilities of those people who are MEWP users, those who are under the responsibilities for all of the MEWP operations from the operator forward. And we're going to talk about how planning will assist users to satisfy their responsibilities, and as a result, meet the objectives defined in our industry standards, which is to prevent accidents, personal injuries, and property damage, and establish the requirements that are in the standards for the application, inspections, training, maintenance, repair, and safe operations of mobile elevated work platforms. Today, we're going to talk about the understanding of the respective responsibilities for users of MEWPs and all of their operating personnel, supervisors, operators, and occupants. And while there are other responsibilities within the standards, such as for manufacturers or for owners of the equipment, we're really not going to address those during today's sessions and focus exclusively on the responsibility of users and their subsequent operating personnel. And all of this to promote the effective use of powered access equipment. We hope that after today's presentation, users of MEWPs will be aware of the responsibilities and plan and manage MEWP operations to prevent avoidable actions displayed in the pictures that you see here, which are today just too common in occurrence. And in addition to the safe use responsibilities in the standards, IPAF accident reporting data can provide MEWP users some insights into the range of issues that they must also consider when they're developing a MEWP safe use plan. Our 2016 to 2018 lost time incident report that you're seeing on the screen is part of that information that we have provided in our reporting. And here you can see that we've identified 12 types of incidents that are known potential hazards. You can read more about the accident report by visiting our website that's on the screen here, www.ipaf.org/accidents, and read more about accident data for your further information. So we're going to talk about industry standards, and standards are basically just an agreed way of doing things. Our industry standards are also commonly referred to as industry best practices. In December of 2018, we published a suite of standards, the Design, Safe Use, and Training standards that went into effect June of 2020. So all of these standards are now in effect. And today we're going to focus in on the A92.22 Safe Use Standard and its reflective training standard that associates how to train on that material, the A92.24. These equally correlate with the Canadian standards, the CSA B354.7 for safe use and the CSA B354.8 for training. Very, very common, but there are a few differences, and we can point those out as we move forward. So what we're going to do today is go through the standard and look at the different elements within the standards and give you an understanding of what those responsibilities are. And standards provide definitions that are unique to the standard. As an example, a user is defined as an entity who has care, custody, and control of a MEWP. I can assure you, if you go to a Webster's dictionary and you look up user, that's not the definition you're going to find. So that's why you can go and you see the value of the definitions within the standards, because they provide a unique definition for terms that apply to our specific standards. Now, a user, well, they have care, control, and custody of it, and they're typically the employer of the MEWP operator. And a user may also have other responsibilities. So, as an example, a dealer, who is normally a rental company in most cases, a dealer has their own set of responsibilities. We're not going to address those specifically in today's presentation, but a dealer is also a user because he has drivers and mechanics or even sales personnel who will operate that. So they're a user, and they also own the equipment. So they have responsibilities as an owner. And those elements could be true for any user. So a user, if you have responsibilities outside of what we're going to talk about today, we're going to have to reflect on those responsibilities in the standards. We're going to just focus in on user responsibilities today. Also, as we look at these definitions, you look at the definition for training. And training, it gives you the example that it is the instructions to enable a trainee to become a qualified person. So think about that in terms of what the definition is telling you for responsibilities. Training doesn't make a person qualified, it enables them to become qualified. And as we go through this, we'll talk about how we define a person being qualified, specifically an operator. So definitions are an important component, understanding your responsibilities. Now I'm going to turn it over to Bal, and Bal will take you through some of our next sections.
Thank you, Tony. And if we go to the slide that we are seeing right now, we want to start by describing that although standards provide the specific responsibilities, and as Tony mentioned, a compilation of best practices, we need to recognize that not all the conceivable issues that you may face on safe operation will be there for consideration. So it is important that we take this as the baseline, but there may be other aspects that you want to consider when you are planning to do your activities and making sure that equipment has the right integrity before it's selected to do the job. Moving to the next slide, Tony. We're going to start, as Tony said, we're going to focus on the safe use and training standards. And what you are seeing here is it's a graphical description of what will be a safe use plan for MEWPs. And I know it looks overwhelming, but I wanna just link this. If you think in general safety, okay, in anything that is done at the workplace, you always are considering what is the risk that the activity that I'm going to do will bring to that person doing the activity or a group of persons. What is the risk of the actual environment where I'm going to do the activity? What are those risks that will be out there? The worker using tools and equipment, the conditions of those tools and equipment, and the way they operate, how does that affect the overall risk of the activity? And then knowing how to do the activity in the best possible way, which will translate in a proper execution and a safe execution. So training, so critical, knowledge and having the experience. As Tony said, just going through the training, that doesn't mean that is a competent individual. And then barriers in case things go wrong. So I was giving you just a layout. If you go to general safety, that's how you think on how to make a safe use plan. And you can see here on the top of this graphic, risk assessment right there. And it's talking about that activity, as I was mentioning, and then equipment selection and maintenance, inspections and repairs, all about the conditions of that equipment that is going to be used. You can see examples of something else I mentioned, train personnel and operator familiarization. It's about knowing before doing, because that is critical to stay safe when doing an activity. And we know that it's unavoidable that some people will make mistakes eventually. We're humans and humans commit errors. So that's why the supervisors that are overseeing the operation, what they know on the selection of equipment, the risk that is on the environment, the risk of the activity is critical, so they can be part of that, proceed or stop the activity, and that becomes critical. So just wanted to make sure you hear a little bit of context on how what you see here, while overwhelming, may not be different to what you're doing to stay safe in other activities in your workplace. So moving to the next slide, Tony. And one critical part to recognize is that different pieces of equipment will have different controls and different features. And it's critical that a meaningful way to have access to understand those features and different components, it's available. And that in the standard is mentioned through the operator manual. And you can see here how the user should ensure that the people that is going to operate the equipment reads and understand what the manufacturer is saying is the best possible way to use that piece of equipment. So it's pretty important to keep in mind that to have access to information first, we gotta have a way to get that information in our hands, in the hands of the operators. And in this case, what the standard is suggesting, the best possible way is having that manual in place that will allow that. And this is critical as well for the familiarization with the make and model for the safe operation of this equipment. So moving to the next slide, Tony. And while training, records in training are pretty common and have established more and more as a best practice to understand people it's aware of how to properly do an activity. Familiarization is not necessarily as common to be documented. And we can see here that the manufacturers, dealers, users should have this process establishing where there is familiarization, and this familiarization should be documented. So we have a way to go back and confirm that we systematically are providing the information that the people using the equipment needs to do it safe. Moving to the next slide, Tony. Just want to make sure that you see as well that as in any other piece of equipment, but more critical because this piece is going to be providing power access, is going to be lifting people. Modifications to the equipment may create an impact on the integrity on the equipment. And that's why it's critical that any modifications should be in line with what manufacturers are saying modifications can be, and can only be done if manufacturers are actually providing approval to do those. And those are recommended by the standard, should not be done more than that for the owner of that piece of equipment. So just being very aware that any modifications can compromise integrity, and that can create a significant risk for the people using the equipment. It's key. Then moving to the next slide, as again, just translating what we are reviewing in the MEWP activities to general safety, just maintenance of the equipment, also pretty critical. Maintenance, inspecting the equipment. Maintenance is gonna let us know if that the equipment has the best chance to stay and remain safe when we operate on it. Inspecting them are gonna help us to make sure the integrity hasn't changed. And that can be a regular inspection, but then before the job, that also becomes critical. So you can see here how there is responsibilities on the owner side as well as in the users. And in the owners, as example, scheduled maintenance, pre-delivery pre-delivery inspections of the equipment, frequent inspections, and the annual inspection, fundamental. But then the user, he needs to make sure, as I said, before the equipment is used, and then the daily pre-use inspection being a very important part. So maintenance inspections are critical, as in any other equipment as well. Moving to the next slide, then we're talking about the context of risk assessment. And, you know, it's a key part of the operation. And assessment should include identifying what is going to be done, as we saw in the graphic, selecting the appropriate equipment for the task. And that should consider as well the environmental aspects, can be, you know, the conditions of the terrain and other aspects as well. Then what will be the control measures that we're going to implement to stay safe for the activity we're going to do. And the best practices that we know more likely are going to keep us safe. Those are the procedures of how to stay safe in that same activity. And that's combining with what we learn once we are in that environment. And what if things go bad? What if the equipment stops working or something goes wrong? We need to make sure that risk assessment includes rescue from height, and then that the result of this risk assessment is properly communicated to those that are going to be involved. And you can see that the user is responsible to ensure that there is a risk assessment performed by qualified personnel. And as Tony mentioned, qualified has a definition, and we're going to continue talking about that. So moving to the next slide, when we talk about the new personal qualifications and training requirements, too often training by itself is considered the only tool required to achieve the title to be qualified for a task. But that is a piece of the equation. But this ultimate is really the evaluation of the user, that the individual is qualified for the task that is going to be performed. That is the key, right? Just training is just the beginning of the journey, but qualifying that individual can actually do safely the operation of that equipment is the end goal. So before training, users must ensure that candidates are both physically and mentally capable for MEWP operations, especially because they're going to be working at heights and with power equipment. And if the person is afraid of heights, likely will not be a good candidate to be a MEWP operator, obviously. And it's important to review that. It's not the same, even if there is a MEWP operator already qualified. It's not the same thing to be doing an activity at 20 feet or doing 120 feet. That affects different. And even when they show you those credentials, that doesn't mean they are qualified to do the activity. And you can see here, talking about those responsibilities, you know, the importance of having the people that is going to use equipment and the occupants qualified to understand the risk around them and how to conduct safely the activity becomes key. So training and qualifications quite important when operating a MEWP piece of equipment. And it's not only the people at the equipment, the people operating and the people inside the basket, but it's also there's people supervising and the user that needs to understand how to ensure everybody's qualified to do the job. And then it's important to think as well, moving to the next slide, Tony, that there may be questions. People may have questions when they are over there in their journey to learn how to be safe operating equipment. So the operators need somebody that will answer those questions. And that's why the standard mentions the user must have in their plan means for the people operating the equipment to communicate any questions they may have and ensure that they get the information they need, the operator get the information they need so they can operate the equipment safely. So we just went through information that is critical on how to do a safe use plan and some of the training qualification aspects. But I'm going to pass it now to back to Tony, that he's going to cover other key aspects, including what we do before operation. Over to you, Tony.
Thank you, Bal. As Bal has just described, you know, we've gone out and we've developed a safe use plan. We have done our risk assessment. We've gone out there and evaluated our employees and made sure that they're properly trained. And now let's go to work. So what do we need to do? What's the next step, even though we have those things in process? Well, having a safe use plan is useless if the only one who is aware of the plan is the person who wrote it. So having it sit on the shelf in the office, it's a useless tool. The plan must be communicated and understood and followed by all persons involved in the MEWP operations, to include MEWP supervisors, operators, and occupants as needed. This is not a one-time responsibility at the very start of the job, but an ongoing one as personnel can change on the job during the course of it. User must ensure that compliance is taking place every day on the job. So there has to be an assignment of supervision to monitor, supervise, and conduct ongoing evaluations of the competency of the personnel on the job performing these tasks. This is all part of that safe use plan. So now that we also have that risk assessment in place, the risk assessment is we went to the beginning of the job and here we have it. And we all know that job conditions can change. So what you need to do is make sure that before and during the use of the operation, and here's some of the language that you really need to take in if you're a user. The user shall ensure and the operator shall perform. So ultimately, it is the user, the employer's responsibility to make sure all these things are being done. So even though we have a trained operator, the issue isn't that I've trained them and now my hand, you know, I can wipe my hands and move forward. It's you need to make sure that these things are being done. And in this particular case, making sure that a workplace inspection is done before and during daily operation. The standard details a bunch of items that can take into consideration while you're doing that. And that's part of operator training, that those items will be taken care of. But if I give you an example, is if we end up having crane operations going on at the same time that we're doing our MEWP operations, and they're going to have to be maneuvering material over our head, then we get to the point where it's okay, now we've done our workplace inspection. if our risk assessment didn't detail for that operator, what do I do when this situation happens? We're at a standstill. So it has to provide that level of detail, or we have to give the instructions to the operator that says, hey, when this happens, you need to stop your operation and go to your immediate supervisor to detail how we're moving forward. So understanding that we have risk assessments, and then we have the daily workplace inspections, you also need to have processes and procedures on how to apply those. So that's on the daily process, but prior to each day's operations, what needs to happen? And again, here's that language. The user shall ensure. So again, user responsibility, and the operator shall comply with prior to each operation. And this is, what I would characterize as standard operating procedures. So if I'm a MEWP operator, we have potentially stabilizing devices, outriggers, extendable axles. They need to be made sure that they're out and in place and properly set for operations. Guardrails are on the machine. Well, we need to make sure that the guardrails are properly in place and the gates are closed, the loads are distributed, that all the occupants have received their occupant knowledge, and that if there's any type of personal fall protection that is required, that's in place and attached and used. So here's the things that are again can become commonplace, and I could give you examples of the operators who are wearing personal fall protection and have it connected to their D-ring as opposed to connected to the anchorage on the machine. So these are things that we need to make sure take place each and every time during operation. Here's another item that's kind of stuck in the standard that is a user responsibility, and it really falls into your risk assessment. But it's a very unique one that was highlighted within the standard, and that's that the user shall ensure that if a MEWP is being used in what's known as a hazardous environment, and the hazard environment by this definition is where flammable or explosive gases or particles are present. So too often people saying, look for hazardous environments, and people say those are places where there's a hazard. Well, this is really specific to flammable or explosion type of situations. And in those cases, the area, none of the machines typically are designed to work in those areas. So in the selection of the equipment in these environments, they need to get a machine that is designated to work in this environment before they allow anyone to work on that equipment in that area. So again, user responsibility, very specific and maybe niche, but one of those things that you need to be aware of because there are those applications out in the marketplace. Now we're into this huge bucket in the standard, and the huge bucket is specific requirements for operation of a MEWP. And there's a lot of detail here. So here are two of the first items that are on here. The first one is fall protection and weather considerations. With most equipment, fall protection requires full guardrail systems to address potential falls from height. That's true for all MEWPs too. However, personal fall protection is required in addition to the guardrails for all occupants of Group B, or what is called a boom type MEWP. So training will inform you on what this is and how you are supposed to apply to this thing. But again, here's a very specific element that is tied to MEWPs. Full guardrail, and I also need personal fall protection on Group B type machines. If you're in Canada, they'll also have a requirement where it is on fall protection, personal fall protection is required on all moving MEWPs. So you need to know what those requirements are in the area that you're working. Now we have weather considerations that are part of this requirements for operation. And again, now we have this wide range of items such as wind, lightning, and ice, storms that are consideration. Very specific to MEWP safe operations is wind considerations. So you need to be aware of it, that we have machines that can be designed for zero wind, indoor operations only, and you have to have zero exposure to wind. And those that are even outside have to be in an area where they're exposed to a maximum of 12 meters per second or 28 miles per hour. If you put them in, they're exposed to gusts more than that, then you have the potential instability considerations that can affect tip overs. So again, having things like an anemometer, a wind device that measures these are very critical to safe use plans. How do people know what the wind is? Well, listening to the weather report or know what the wind is at the airport isn't really helpful for the wind at the job where you are, even the elevation you're at, because if you're aware of the dynamics of wind can actually double its speed every 60 feet in elevation. So again, having this knowledge is a consideration for safety, and it is the ultimate responsibility of the user. So all involved with MEWP operations must be aware of these requirements. Now, as I told you, there's a lot in this bucket, and I right now, Bal will be throwing stones at me because I violated one of the rules for good presentations, which is putting too much information on a slide. But don't worry, I'm not expecting anybody to read this, and I'm not going to go over every one of these line items one by one. Really, what I want you to understand is the depth and breadth of the items that are to be considered in safe MEWP operations. And these are the things that we do bring up when we're talking to MEWP operators, and they are things that we will include now in the new MEWP supervisors courses. But again, these things need to be very clear on who's doing what and when. Again, here it goes. I couldn't even fit all of those on that one slide. So I have a mortal sin on presentations times 2. But this slide completes that long list of requirements that must be considered. And here is another example of how these are MEWP specific in nature for planning. And here's one of exiting an elevated work platform. Now, this has long been a forbidden no-no. Now, keep your feet firmly on the floor of the platform, and we never want to climb on any of the guardrails. So getting out of that work platform when it's elevated has generally been a monster no-no in the industry. However, I will guarantee you that any of you who've been in this industry long enough have seen with some frequency people exiting an elevated work platform. And entering or exiting an elevated platform at height may be allowed through a procedure that is addressed, that is provided by the manufacturer or qualified person that addresses the guidelines in the standard. So there are now information in there that this can be an acceptable procedure as a manufacturer or qualified person can define based on the risk assessment saying this is the appropriate equipment to do it, and this is the only way we can safely get to these workplaces. So again, MEWP operations can be 100% safe when planned and executed by qualified personnel and supervised for their compliance. All right, and I think I'm going to go back over to you, Bal.
Yeah, thank you, Tony. And if you click one more time, I think there will be some pictures there that try to show that going to back to the training aspect, and the importance of knowing how to be safe. All users of the MEWPs should either train and familiarize or ensure that the people that is gonna be authorized as operators and occupants of the platform are trained and familiarized according to the standard for training that is now available, which is 892.24. And those records gotta be retained. And the details of the requirements is something we're gonna review together now. So moving to the next slide, I gotta tell you, being a safety professional for more than 20 years in oil and gas, power generation, and construction, this standard in particular, it's pretty exciting to me Because when you are a safety professional and you are in the field trying to help people stay safe, it's pretty obvious right away that having the right information, if the workers know how to stay safe, that's a big step towards preventing accidents. And the definition of what a good training looks like, it's something that, depending on the industry or depending on the activity, may have a more concrete or discrete state. And this standard in particular, this ancillary 2.24, is really helping us understand the training requirements for use, operation, inspection, testing, and maintenance of the MEWPs. And I think having all those best practice included in one place is really significant. And obviously now what will make it move the needle to keep workplaces safe is actually using this content and making sure that people learns with a minimum of this structure that we're going to review right now. And just want to mention before we move to the next slide, in the previous standard, there was a training requirement, but there was nothing as specific with guidelines as we have now. So pretty excited, as I said. I wanted just to make a pause and give you that point of view, because coming from the field, being there, trying to help people stay safe, that's so critical. That when they start this journey to know how to stay safe doing an activity, that they receive the right training to do so. So moving to the next slide, we're going to cover the theory side that can be done in classroom and online, what they need to know, what you need to inform them, and then the practical evaluation. So the next slides are going to be all about the classroom training. And again, as Tony said, we don't intend that you read everything that is here, but I want to make just a couple of precisions so you see how important this is. If you see in point A, we have been discussing how selecting the right platform will be critical for the safety of that operator and occupants of the platform. So point A is just talking about how do I select a MEWP, right? In the more educated way that is going to keep me safe. What is the purpose of the safety? The operator manual is point number 2 in point B. And then we talk about the integrity of the equipment and having an inspection done before the activity, quite important, but having a very extensive inspection done every year. You see point D mentioning that, because that's when a more thorough inspection is done. So I just wanted to show you some of the examples, and then how to properly, how the training content should include how to properly operate and recognize risk. You can see it in points F, G, H, I, and J. But as I said, the idea is not to read all that, but just to let you know that the reason all these points are inside the training is because they linked to the safe use plan and how to link the different risks that individuals can face, and how to teach them how to recognize that. So we move to the next slide, Tony. It's just a continuation of that familiarization. You can see point K and L talking about familiarization. Then lessons learned in point M. The regulation standards and safety rules come from lessons that have been learned and best practices, right? Trying to be safe, and that's there, so among other points. And moving to the next slide, so we'll see that the standard also includes the importance that we train operators of their responsibility to communicate with the people that is inside the platform, and how do they need to communicate so they stay safe. So just wanted to make sure we went through the content, and you see how now we have a clear guideline on the minimum standard to make sure that that person that is being trained learns the key things to be safe when they operate. And then moving to the next slide, obviously that's all theory. that's all learned with information being received by the individuals. But how can we know if they are actually going to be able to safely operate the equipment? Well, now we're seeing here on the screen the section about the practical evaluation, the practical training, right? And you can see here how this is, what we're going to do is we're going to go and have a deep dive. That's going to be a different webinar on the training standard, but just want to make sure to point how in the content of this standard, you can see it's going to make sure that that individual knows how to walk around and familiarize with the piece of equipment. And that includes the major components and how they work, the pre-start inspection. That it's critical to make sure the equipment is in right conditions, and then the environmental risk, understanding what is the risk of the work site where they're going to work, and then another critical thing that is making the plan on how they are going to go and achieve the task. So just wanted to make sure you saw there is also minimum requirements on that practical evaluation that are pretty valuable if we follow them for that person to demonstrate in hands-on training that they can actually be effective using what they learn in theory. And finally, as you can see on the slide in the screen, there are different reasons why retraining may be a ideal to make sure that that individual has the right information. So examples are maybe because the training expired, right? Another example can be because the supervisor realizes, or somebody realizes the operator is not using the equipment in the right way. So maybe retraining will be a way to refresh that knowledge on how to work safely. Another reason can be the operator maybe took the training and then haven't used a MEWP, haven't used what he learned for a period of time. So maybe necessary to retrain, and so he can remember how to be safe. So those are some of the examples, but that retraining, as in anything of major risk, because we got to remember the activities that are done with MEWPs represent high risk, making sure that they know, and having a scenarios in where we go retrain the operator is critical. And then moving, Tony, we said, moving to the next slide, Tony, we said that the user and should also be responsible to ensure that the operator provide instruction or otherwise ensure that all the people in the platform have a basic level of knowledge about the safety of that piece of equipment. And this is another topic actually on this standard on the section of operator training, which is pretty good. So moving to the next slide, then we talk about the supervisor. We said at the beginning, even if the operator make a mistake and the occupants don't recognize a mistake, supervisor knowing, and if that even happens in the planning, supervisor knowing the right information may be the key to stop a potentially unsafe activity. And this is a new requirement. Just important that we highlight that supervisor training is a new requirement under this updated standard, and includes the proper selection of the MEWPs, rules, regulations related to the use of the MEWPs, potential hazards that Tony described that are associated with the MEWP activities, among other things. And as I said, we're not going to go over everything that needs to be covered, but it's important that you see it's not only the operator that needs to be trained, the occupants, the supervisor, user, all of them have a key role in knowing how to be safe using MEWPs. And then finally, moving to the next couple of slides, what we're going to see is the standard goes even beyond, and is talking on, okay, this is all the content for the training, but look, the person delivering the training should have these characteristics. And look, you see there in 8.1, the training should be delivered by a qualified person. What makes it qualified, it's we talked about that in the previous slides, and then you have that he had the right experience and other characteristics, and the curriculum on the delivery of the training should include what we just went through on the previous slides. The environment of training should be conducive to learning and safe. And important to make sure that in the testing, we saw the practical evaluation, the hands-on training section, that is done in a way that the operator can demonstrate competency in both the theory and the hands-on. So critical aspects for that. And finally, last slide on this section, it's the standard even goes to provide some examples of templates that you can use. When you do the classroom and online training for those that are taking the class, you have here on the left a knowledge evaluation sheet that is an example that is provided by the standard, so you can review and confirm they understand what has been taught. And then the appendix on the right is the actual practical evaluation. So pretty useful to have this on the standard because it sets a minimum bar on how do we confirm knowledge and we confirm practical utilization of that knowledge with the people involved in MEWP activities. And with that, I'm gonna pass it over to Tony to wrap up the session. Over to you, Tony.
Thank you, Bal. I'm gonna have to calm you down a little bit. You're getting a little excited here when we're into that training area.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, folks, here's kind of the summary. Our goal is to support the safe and effective use of mobile elevated work platforms, but that requires action. The ANSI A92.22 safe use and A92.24 training standards provide clear responsibilities that, if followed, will reduce a user's risk and prevent accidents, personal injuries, and property damage. To implement your responsibilities, you must develop a safe use plan. You see how much was involved in everything we talked about. It took us nearly an hour here just to summarize some of the bullet points that are part of safe use in our standards. Today, all we did was raise awareness of these responsibilities. It's up to you to take action. We have a series of webinars that we suggest that you all plan on attending to help you and guide you in the implementation of this plan. We're here to help you invest your time and do it over a period of time that makes it a doable process for everybody. So we encourage you to mark your calendars within this series of plans. Our next webinar is going to talk about the development of a MEWP specific safe use plan. So all of those elements that were in that cloud visual that Bal went over with you, all of those components, the complete making sure that you have a risk assessment, equipment selection, site assessment and preparation, training for personnel, maintenance, inspection, and repairs, considering the safety of others, unauthorized use, site-specific requirements, training for your supervisors and providing occupant knowledge, and making sure all this is documented. That's all a safe use plan. It's a lot, and we're going to provide you with a guidance of how to do that and provide you with tools and templates on how to create that. So we would ask you to consider joining us on April 22nd. As we move down that, as we take those pieces and try to put more meat to the bone, on the 27th, we're going to be providing standardized, compliant, reliable training. So Bal went over all of these components. As we said, we have a training requirement passed. Now we have a training standard. What is standardized training? how are you going to go over there and have one person get trained in an hour, someone get trained in 2 hours, somebody taking a day to get trained? What standard are we following that you have those variables? And standardized training should look the same regardless of who's delivering the training, where they deliver it, and when they deliver it. So we're going to talk about standardized training and what our new standard really implies for you as users to ensure that when you're providing that training to your employees, they're getting the training that they should receive. On the 24th, we're going to do a presentation on the MEWP risk assessment safe work procedures. While we talked a little about the risk assessment and identifying the hazards, one of the things that most people don't understand in that risk assessment process is coming up with the safe work procedures. So an example would be, we identify that there's an overhead power line and we say, stay 10 feet away. All right. We give that instructions to our operator and he takes a boom lift over that can rotate easily into that 10-foot area. Well, having a 10-foot marker up there didn't do much good. You need to have safe work procedures to address how are we going to, in all of our operations, make sure those things take place. And we're going to talk about how we develop those safe work procedures and provide you tools to help you accomplish that need. And last one we have scheduled, and we have others that will be coming up in the air, are how to conduct MEWP operator evaluations. So one of the new requirements in the standard is that each employer shall assign someone to monitor, supervise, and evaluate people on an ongoing basis to have the proficiency when they were trained. So how often is ongoing? And how are you measuring proficiency? And we obviously have some opinions on that we will share with you on being able to do that on an ongoing basis. We have lots of other events for IPAF as well. We have our IPAF Summit, which is taking place on March 18th. So really what we suggest that you do is visit our website, IPAF.org. You can see the address there. Gets us to the U.S. upcoming events. And there you can look at it because we'll have the registration for all of these events and other events that IPAF is having, because some of the webinars we have that are being offered by IPAF at the same time are international and are broader in nature. And here we're trying to be specific to the U.S. So we do encourage you to mark your calendars and join us for those. So with that, we've kind of completed all of our presentation. Both Bal and I really appreciate everyone's attention and ability to take your time to be with us today. We hope that it was of value to you. So I guess now we'll go through and try to answer a few questions. We have about 6 minutes left in our hour. So let me pop up some of our Q&A.
Yeah, Tony, and just while you pop up that, there is a question here that if the assistant to this training will receive a copy of this recording.
The answer is that these are all be recorded. Everybody who is here will be provided with a link that they can actually review this again or share it with other people within your organizations. This is not a secret club that we have here. Really, this is our desire to reach out to the entire industry and provide valuable information that people can use. So we encourage everybody to share this. We encourage you to go out and talk to people who you think would also benefit from joining us. We max out about 500 on our web series, so we'll be able to take a few more than we had today. So yes, they'll be recorded, and you can share those, and they'll be provided to everybody who has registered for our event.
That's great, Tony. Another question that popped up here. It says, if the attendant to this webinar, will they be receiving an invitation for the next webinars? It's mentioned here, it seems to be very informative webinars. Glad I attended and appreciate that was said there. And Tony, will the people attending here receive another invitation for the next webinar?
I'll put it this way, if we have received emails to the registration, I can assure you that we will be sending out awarenesses to register for the event. If everything else fails, as I said, we are now putting the link to register on our website. So if we fail through process that we didn't get to you, know that every one of these events, you can go to our website and register for those. But if you got email communications from us this time, you'll be getting them from us on the future events as well.
That's great, Tony. I'm helping you here. It's very exciting to see we have 21 more questions, Tony, and only 3 minutes left. So how do you want to handle it?
Well, I'll let you pick out whatever questions you want to throw at us. Any of the questions who we don't have the opportunity to answer live, we will answer those. And when we send the link out, somehow we will send out responses to these as well.
That's great, Tony. Okay, so Michael is asking us, he got a notification to download the A92.20 version. He's asking, can we describe what are the difference to what we are describing?
Well, A92.20 is the design standard. So if you're not a manufacturer or component supplier to it, truthfully, you're probably not going to need that, not part of the user group. If you're a manufacturer of it, as effective of June of 2020, every unit manufactured in the U.S. Was required to be designed and manufactured to that standard. There are significant differences in that standard. If you go to our website, IPAF.org, and type in the search box white paper, you can identify a white paper that will actually speak to some of the pointed differences in the design standard. Some of the very specific items that are in the design standard is the requirement for load sensing on the majority of all work platforms produced. It eliminates the ability to use chains anymore on the end gates. It requires a new height on guardrails from 1 meter to 1.1 meter, which really makes them higher. And in many cases on smaller scissor lifts, may make them inaccessible to go through a standard doorway unless the manufacturer now has a mountable or foldable guardrail. So I don't want to get too off track on the design standard, but the answer is if you're a manufacturer, you should be following that since June of last year.
Great, Tony. Thank you for that. And we have 1 minute left, but picking another question that seems very relevant for everybody here. Has OSHA come out with a new standard for MEWPs?
The last time OSHA addressed the MEWP standards was 1970. When the standards were first published, the OSHA regulations still refer to ANSI A92.2 1969, which is for mobile aerial devices. It treats scissor lifts as rolling scaffolds. So the answer is no. They haven't. There's no appetite for our federal government to spend more time in regulations. So it'd be unlikely that you're going to see any change anytime soon. That's really why our industry has our standards, because we review these every 5 years at a minimum, and they are, again, even what OSHA would consider as industry best practices that they generally will refer to when they do the 5A1 general duty clause, the requirement for having a safe workplace.
That's great, Tony. And with that, I think we are on time. Tony, would you like to close the session?
Again, I'm going to close the session by thanking everyone for being here. I believe that this session really was to try to just raise awareness of all of the elements that are included in safe use that a user of the equipment, and a user, I'm going to use my own terminology, which is anyone who authorizes someone to operate one of the machines, you're a user of the equipment. And that's whether you're a rental company, a manufacturer, a contractor, using it for any purpose, you're a user of the equipment, and you have all these responsibilities. And these responsibilities are the way that you as the employer ensure the safety of the people who are operating on the equipment, near the equipment, or even being in the area of where your operations are taking place, the general public. There's a lot to be considered here, and a safe use plan is really an effective way to ensure that all of these elements are taken care of. And as Bal mentioned, there seems like a lot there, and there is, but it's a very doable process. Trying to read the standard and follow the standard is a little bit more complex. So trying to come up with documents that are usable is really our goal as we're moving forward here. We're here to listen to you as well. If there's things that we can do to assist, that's what we as an association are here to do. So we're here. I'll give you everyone my email address. I'm Tony, TONY.Groat, GROAT at IPAF.org. So that's my email address. So you can send me any questions, comments that you have. We're here as an association to promote the safe and effective use of these products. This is an example of it. I appreciate the efforts of our North American Council. Bal is our chairman, for being supportive of trying to get this out. As you can see, we're doing a lot this year, and there's a lot more to come. So thank you all for your attention and continued support.
That's great, Tony. We hope you find this session useful. Until next time, everybody.
Cheers.